The first man hit the ground before Benjamin Turner even registered what had happened. He had been sitting at the back of Marin's trade post, needle in hand, trying to thread catgut through the torn shoulder of a mule driver named Corvin who had gotten himself tangled in a wagon wheel. The post was packed, which it always was on a 7-day, when the dust-road caravans came rolling through Ashfork, and everyone who had been out on the high plains for a week needed salt, spirits, and a reason to shout. The noise was already high enough that Benjamin had to lean close to Corvin's ear to tell him to hold still, and then a table went over. Benjamin looked up. The woman standing in the center of the room was an orc. She was tall, a full head above the tallest man in the establishment, with gray-green skin the color of river stone after rain, and dark hair pinned back in a practical braid that had partly come loose from the fight she had apparently already started before the table fell. She wore fitted warrior's leathers the color of dark amber, laced tight across her chest and waist, with short protective guards strapped to her forearms, and a short split skirt over close-fitting riding trousers that showed every line of her powerful legs. She was not dressed for war exactly, but she was dressed for a woman who had never in her life decided to stop being dangerous. On her hip hung a short curved blade that she had not drawn, which Benjamin found remarkable given the circumstances. The circumstances being that there were now 6 men on their feet and ranging around her, and all 6 of them were angry. He recognized 3 of them. Garrett Moss and his 2 brothers, who ran a rough freight concern out of the eastern end of the road, and who had a documented history of difficulty. The other 3 were outsiders, rough-looking, wearing mismatched bits of armor that spoke of mercenary work. One of them had a split lip already, and his nose was bleeding freely. That was the first man on the ground. The woman's eyes tracked all 6 of them with the calm, methodical attention of a person counting inventory. "You want to try again," she said. Her voice was low and even and carried the slight formal diction of someone who had learned the common tongue as a second language and had learned it very well. "I have the time." Garrett Moss pulled a short axe from his belt. "You broke Roger's nose, you green-skinned." He did not finish the sentence because she moved. Benjamin had stitched enough wounds to have a professional relationship with violence, and he had thought that gave him some capacity to observe it clearly. But what she did in the next 30 seconds was genuinely difficult to follow. She took the axe wrist before the axe could swing, turned her whole body into the leverage, and put Garrett Moss face first into the bar with a sound that rattled the hanging lanterns. The second brother came at her from the left with a punch that she slipped entirely, stepping inside it, and then she drove her elbow up into his jaw with the neat, compressed force of someone who had done that particular motion 10,000 times. He sat down heavily and did not get back up. The third brother hesitated, which gave the 2 mercenaries on her right time to coordinate, and they rushed her together. She let one of them grab her arm, used his own grip to pull him off balance, and introduced his forehead to the edge of the nearest table. The other mercenary she caught with a flat-palmed strike to the sternum that sent him stumbling backward into a shelf of dried goods, which cascaded down around him in a wonderful clatter of tin and burlap. The 6th man, the last mercenary, was already backing toward the door when she turned to look at him. He ran. She stood in the wreckage of Marin's trade post, in the silence that falls after something extraordinary, surrounded by 5 incapacitated men and a room full of stunned onlookers. A bruise was forming along her left cheekbone where someone had managed to connect. Her braid had mostly come down. She was breathing steadily, not hard. Corvin, beside Benjamin, whispered something reverent and profane. Benjamin very carefully set down his needle, stood up, and walked into the middle of the room. Later, he would not be entirely sure what compelled him to do this. It was not, he thought, bravery in any traditional sense. It was more the professional instinct that had walked him toward wounds and disasters all his adult life, the same thing that made him cross a burning village at 19 to pull a man out of a collapsed shed. He was a field surgeon and an apothecary, and something here needed attending to. He stopped about 4 feet in front of her. She turned her eyes to him. They were dark amber, nearly the same color as her leathers, and they were the sharpest eyes he had ever looked into, measuring him with an intelligence that was brisk and unsentimental. "Are you going to be a problem?" she said. "No," Benjamin said. "Your cheek needs looking at." She stared at him. "I am a field surgeon," he said. "I have a kid in the back. That bruise is bad enough that I want to make sure nothing cracked before we leave it to its own devices." She looked at him for a long moment. The whole room was watching. He was aware, with the peripheral part of his awareness that never quite turned off, that he was a fairly average-looking man of 29 years, brown-haired and lean and of middling height, holding himself very still in front of an orc woman who had just put 5 men on the floor, and that everyone in the room expected him to either do something stupid or retreat. He did neither. "Your cheek," he said again, quietly. Something shifted in her expression. Not softening exactly. More like reassessment. "Fine," she said. He led her to the back room. Her name was Ursa Ironhide, she told him, while he cleaned the bruise and checked the cheekbone with careful fingers, pressing just firmly enough to map the bone beneath the skin. She was a courier and a guard for hire, currently contracted to deliver a sealed document case from the Eastern clans to the Magistrates' Council at the city of Drenville, 3 weeks' travel west along the High Plains Road. She told him this in the same flat, even way she had told him everything, sitting on his treatment table with the patience of someone who had endured worse than a field surgeon pressing on her face. "What started the fight?" he asked. "Garrett Moss," she said, "was told 2 months ago by his employer that the document case I am carrying should be intercepted and destroyed. He has been waiting for this 7 days since I came into the post to attempt it. He brought friends." Benjamin absorbed this. "And the document case," she glanced at the leather satchel still strapped across her back, which she had not removed through the entirety of the fight or the treatment. "Still here." "This employer," Benjamin said. "Anyone I should know about?" "His name is Rain," Ursa said. "Callum Rain. He is the current steward of the Drenville region, and he has been acting as regent since Lord Aldrich died without a visible heir. The documents I carry are letters of verification for the true heir, Aldrich's natural son, who was sent east to be raised by his mother's clan 12 years ago. If I deliver them, Rain loses his position. If I do not deliver them, an innocent man loses his inheritance, and the whole of the High Plains trade region falls into the hands of someone who has been funneling tax revenue into his own accounts for the last 3 years. Benjamin sat back on his stool and looked at her. "That is," he said, "a great deal to be carrying in one leather case." "Yes," Ursa agreed, "and you walked through Ashfork openly. I needed supplies. I was hoping Rain's people would not be this far east yet." Paused. "I was wrong." Benjamin stood up and went to the window. Ashfork's main road was visible from here, a long brown line of packed earth between low buildings, the distant mesa rising behind the eastern rooftops like a dry wave. He could see 3 horses tied outside that he had not seen before. Outsiders. The mercenary who had run had presumably gone to those horses and was presumably now riding hard to whoever had hired Garrett Moss, and that meant that Ursa's timetable had just collapsed. "How many more can Rain send?" he asked. "I do not know," she said. "Enough to be a problem. The next stop on the road is Colbin's Ridge, 2 days' ride. After that it is open plains for 10 days before you reach Drenville's outlying settlements. You cannot ride alone on the open plains for 10 days with Rain's people hunting you." "No," she agreed. "I cannot." He turned around from the window. She was watching him with that amber-eyed assessment that he was already beginning to recognize, the look she used when she was deciding whether someone was useful or a problem. "I am heading to Drenville," he said. "I have been asked to consult on a difficult case at the healer's hall there, and I have been putting it off for 2 months because I did not want to make the ride alone. My wagon is in the yard behind this post, and it has a covered bed with enough room for supplies and sleeping. I travel slowly, which is a disadvantage, but I know this road well, and I know every trade post and water stop between here and Drenville." Ursa Ironhide looked at him for a long moment. "You are a field surgeon who drives a covered wagon and knows the water stops," she said. "Yes. And you are proposing to accompany me." "Yes. Do you understand what that means?" she said. "Rain's people will not distinguish between the person carrying the case and anyone traveling with her. You would be putting yourself in their path." "I noticed that," he said. "I am still proposing it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why?" Benjamin thought about it honestly. "Because what is in that case matters," he said. "And because you cannot do everything alone," he paused. "And because your cheek is going to hurt tomorrow and someone should check on it." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something adjacent to one. "Very well, Benjamin Turner," she said. "We leave at dawn." He had not told her his name. She had checked his license papers while he was filling a water bucket. She admitted later, on the road, when he asked. His name, his certification as an apothecary and field surgeon registered to the Healers' Hall of the Southern District, and his wagon registration were all visible in the document wallet he had left on the treatment table. She had read them all in about 30 seconds. "Did I pass inspection?" he asked. "Provisionally," she said, and there was definitely something in her voice that time, a warmth she had not bothered to conceal. He felt it settle into the space behind his ribs and stayed quiet. The high plains in early autumn were the color of old gold, the grasses gone dry, and the sky enormous and pale blue overhead. The wagon road cut straight and direct through it, sometimes dipping into shallow creek beds that had to be navigated carefully, sometimes rising to low ridges where you could see 20 miles in every direction, which was both beautiful and tactically useful. Ursa rode on the seat beside him the first day and said very little, but she watched the horizon with an attention that was deeply reassuring to Benjamin, who was not, as a rule, a combat-trained man. He had a short bow under the seat and a long knife, and he had used both in his life, but he was under no illusions about his odds against trained mercenaries. She, on the other hand, was deeply reassuring. On the first night they stopped at a water hole called Drover's Rest, which was little more than a stone trough in a cluster of dusty cottonwood trees, and Benjamin made a modest camp while Ursa walked the perimeter in a wide circle that took her 20 minutes, checking for tracks and recent sign. When she came back she said, "Nothing recent. We are ahead of pursuit for now." And then she sat down at the fire he had built and accepted the tin of trail stew he offered without ceremony. "You know this road," she said. It was not entirely a question. "I have run it 8 times, he said. "The first time I was 17, riding with my uncle's medicine cart. He was a proper apothecary trained in the city. He taught me most of what I know on these roads." "Is he still running it?" "He died 6 years ago," Benjamin said. "Fever, the kind he could diagnose and treat in anyone else and could not fight in himself. That happens sometimes." Ursa was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry," she said, and it was plain and direct, without the soft awkwardness that people sometimes brought to condolences, and he appreciated that. "It is why I took the Drenville consultation," he said. "It has been too long since I did something that mattered in a way I could measure. I have been in Ashfork for 4 months doing broken arms and milk fever and treating Corvin's shoulder every 3 weeks because the man cannot learn to stay clear of wagon wheels." Ursa made a small sound that was unmistakably a laugh, quickly suppressed. "Tell me about Rain," Benjamin said. She told him then the longer version. Callum Rain had come to the Drenville stewardship through appointment, a smooth and politically connected man who had made himself indispensable to Lord Aldrich in the man's final years. When Aldrich died of a sudden illness 18 months ago, Rain had produced a will that named him regent until a legitimate heir could be established. The heir in question was a young man named Darren, 22 years old, raised among his mother's Eastern Orc clan, who bore the Lord's blood and whose birthright had been verified by 3 clan elders and sealed in the documents Ursa carried. Darren himself was traveling to Drenville by a separate, secret route, expected to arrive within a week of Ursa's delivery. The plan was for Ursa to arrive first, present the documents to the magistrate's council, and establish the legal record before Rain could suppress it. The problem, Ursa said, is that the council in Drenville has been operating under Rain's influence for 18 months. They may not receive the documents openly. That is a problem, Benjamin agreed. It is why the timing matters, she said. Darren needs to arrive quickly enough after I do that the council cannot bury the documents before a public hearing must be called. Once it is public, Rain cannot easily suppress it without making himself look exactly as guilty as he is. And if he decides suppression is worth looking guilty for, Ursa looked at the fire, then we are in a different kind of trouble. The second day was harder. A dry headwind came up off the southern mesa country and hit them straight in the face, and the horses labored against it, and Benjamin drove with his hat pulled low and his eyes half shut. Ursa rode it out without visible complaint, which he found both impressive and slightly humbling. Around midday they crested a long ridge and she put her hand on his arm suddenly and he stopped the horses. On the road a mile back, a plume of dust, 3 riders moving fast. They caught up quicker than I expected, Ursa said, calm. We cannot outrun them with the wagon, Benjamin said. Not on this grade. No, she said. Wait here. She was off the wagon seat before he could respond, unstrapping the short curved blade at her hip and moving to a position behind a low rock outcrop at the road's edge. Benjamin sat very still on the seat and watched the dust plume grow. His heartbeat was elevated. He was not ashamed of this because it was physiologically appropriate. What happened next took less than 5 minutes. The 3 riders came up fast and 2 of them had crossbows. One of them shouted at him to stop, which he was already stopped, and another drew back to train the crossbow on him. Then Ursa came off the outcrop. She did not use the blade. She used herself, the weight and speed of her, coming down from above onto the nearest rider and pulling him clean out of his saddle. And the controlled crash of their landing spooked the horses enough that the second crossbow discharged wide. By the time the 3rd rider had his horse under control, Ursa had the first rider's crossbow and had it aimed, and she said in a voice of absolute flat certainty, "Leave." They left. She came back to the wagon, replaced the short blade, and climbed back onto the seat. She had a cut on her right hand from where the rider's crossbow bolt had scraped her when she grabbed it, and she was pressing the heel of her hand against her side. "Let me see," Benjamin said. "It is minor," she said. "Let me see," he said again. She turned toward him and let him look. The hand was a shallow scrape, nothing concerning. But the heel of her hand was covering something at her side, and when he pressed gently she made a small tight sound. "You are bruised, possibly cracked at least 1 rib," he said, "from the fall." "I have had worse," she said. "I know you have," he said. "Open the jacket." She looked at him, he looked at her. She opened the jacket. He worked carefully, wrapping the ribs with the long linen strips he kept in his kit, his hands moving with the practiced certainty that years of work had built in him. And he was aware, somewhere below the professional level, of the warmth of her and the closeness. The amber leather of her bodice was unlaced on the side to allow the bandaging, and she was very still under his hands, watching his face with an expression he could not entirely read. "Done," he said, not quite moving back immediately. "You are very good at that," she said. "Years of practice." "Not frightened," she said. It was an observation, not a question, and she said it quietly as if she was noting something she had not expected. "Of what?" he asked. "Of me." She held his gaze. "Most people are." He thought about the room in Marin's post, the 5 men on the floor, the absolute economy of what she had done to all of them. He thought about the rider she had pulled off his horse at speed. He thought about the way she occupied space, the coiled quality of her even at rest. "No," he said honestly, "you are extraordinary. That is not the same as frightening." The expression on her face did something then that he thought might have taken a great deal of effort not to conceal. Something opened briefly, and he saw something beneath the composed exterior that was not combat readiness or professional assessment. It was simpler and more private than that. "Keep the wrapping tight for 4 days, he said in his steadiest voice. "Do not use the fall technique again until it heals." "Noted," she said quietly. They traveled the rest of that day in a kind of changed silence, warmer and more charged than what had come before, and when they made camp at a shallow creek bed that Benjamin knew from his previous runs, he built the fire larger than necessary, and she did not complain about it, which told him something. By the third day on the road they had found a rhythm. Benjamin drove and watched the road ahead and managed the horses, whose names were Cobb and Rye, named by his uncle and kept because Benjamin was sentimental about it. Ursa watched the flanks and the horizon and navigated. They talked more now. She told him about the Eastern Orc clan where Darren had grown up, a large and complicated community stretched across 3 river valleys, horse breeders and traders who had a long and mostly peaceful relationship with the human settlements on their borders. She had been hired as a courier because she was known in both worlds, raised among the clans but trained in the common professional guild of guards for hire, and because she had a reputation. A reputation for what? He asked. For finishing, she said. He believed this completely. She asked him in return about the healer's hall, about the case he had been summoned for. He told her it was a long-term poisoning case, slow and methodical, affecting a merchant family in Drenville. The symptoms had baffled 2 city surgeons. Benjamin had been corresponding with the attending healer for months and had a theory he needed to examine in person to confirm. It was, he said, almost certainly a naturally occurring compound being administered in very small amounts over a long time, which was consistent with a dispute over the family's considerable estate. "And does your consultation have anything to do with rain?" Ursa asked, very carefully. Benjamin looked at her. "The merchant family's name is Aldrich Vane," he said. "They are collateral relatives of the late lord." Ursa was quiet for a moment. "If they were to testify at a council hearing and then fall ill," she said slowly, "that would reduce the number of voices who could confirm Darren's claim." "Yes," Benjamin said, "it would. You were coming to Drenville regardless of me." "Yes," he said, "though I will admit that meeting you has made me considerably more interested in arriving." She looked at him sidelong, a glance that held something he was beginning to recognize as particular to her, a look she gave only when he had surprised her pleasantly. "You said that plainly," she said. "I try to say things plainly," he said. "It saves time." That night they camped on a low rise with the wind behind them, and after the fire had burned down to coals and the horses were settled, she sat close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching, and Benjamin sat with his elbows on his knees and looked at the dark plains and did not feel alone in any way he could remember feeling recently. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Back at the post, after the fight, you asked me if I was frightened of you." "I did," she said. "Do you ask that often?" She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke her voice was level but had something underneath it that was careful and honest. "Often enough," she said. "When someone has just seen what I can do and is still standing close to me, it is useful to know early. And what happens when they say yes? Then I know where I stand," she said, "and I do not waste their time or mine. And when they say no," she turned her head and looked at him, and in the low red light of the dying coals her face was stunning, the strong lines of it, the amber eyes, the bruise on her cheek already fading to green-yellow, the loose braid over her shoulder. "It has not happened very often," she said, "not and meant it." He held her gaze. "I meant it." "I know," she said. "That is why I am still here." The silence between them was not empty at all. He moved first, which surprised him later. Not by much, just a turn toward her, a small shift of weight that was a question without words. And she read it the way she read everything, with that bright, precise intelligence, and she answered it by reaching up and touching his jaw with her fingers, her large, scarred, extraordinary hand, and turning his face toward hers. The kiss was not tentative. She was not a woman who did tentative. It was warm and direct, and so unexpectedly tender that it went through him like a good medicine, fast and clarifying, reaching the parts that had been cold for a long time. When they separated, she was watching him with those amber eyes at close range. "Still not frightened," he said. "Good," she said, and there was a fierceness in the word that was also entirely warmth. Colbin's Ridge appeared on the fourth afternoon, a dark cluster of low stone buildings against the pale sky, which was a welcome sight because the wind had picked up again and both of them were tired and the horses needed real water and grain, not the creek-fed travel rations they had been managing. The Ridge was a proper way stop, larger than Ashfork, with a livery and a public house and a small courier office where Ursa needed to register the document case's progress. The trouble started in the public house. They were 2 hours into their stay when Benjamin, returning from the livery where he had checked on Cobb and Rye, walked into the front room and found Ursa standing at the bar with a look on her face that he had learned to read over 4 days of her company. A particular stillness that meant she was calculating whether something was worth the violence it would take to solve. Across the room, a man in a long travel coat was speaking loudly to a second man, but not taking his eyes off Ursa. He was young, well-dressed in a city way that was out of place on the Ridge, and he had a quality of entitled confidence that Benjamin disliked immediately. "The council in Drenville," the man was saying, at a volume clearly meant to carry, "does not receive documents from couriers. It is a matter of credibility. Any document so transported could easily have been forged or tampered with. The council requires certified human agents for sensitive deliveries." "Is that so?" said the barkeep, who was a neutral party and clearly wished to remain one. Benjamin came and stood at the bar next to Ursa. "This is a private conversation," the man said to him. "You are speaking loudly in a public room," Benjamin said. "I am a member of the public. Who are you?" The man smiled with the portion of his face that was not connected to his eyes. "Dennick Harp, steward's aide traveling west." He looked at Ursa. "And you are the courier with the clan documents. The steward has been hoping to meet you." "I am certain he has," Ursa said. "There is no need for all this difficult traveling," Harp said, and his voice dropped to something that tried to be reasonable. "If you surrender the case to me here, I can ensure it reaches the appropriate parties with a proper chain of custody. Your commission will be paid in full. You can head back east." "No," Ursa said. Harp's reasonable tone dropped away like a mask. "The steward's authority in this region is very broad," he said. "Orc travel permits, courier licenses, right-of-way on the trade roads. These things can all be reviewed." Benjamin said very quietly, "Touch her license and I will file a complaint with the Healers' Hall, the Merchants' Guild, and the district magistrate for attempted extortion of a licensed courier conducting verified business. I keep meticulous records." Harp looked at him. "You have no standing here. I am a registered field surgeon with district certification, traveling on documented business, and I have witnessed this exchange," Benjamin said. "My standing is exactly what the law says it is." He paused. "My name is Benjamin Turner. You are welcome to check my credentials." Harp stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out of the public house without another word. Ursa set her drink down and looked at Benjamin with an expression that was doing several things at once. "That was very precise," she said. "I know the regulations," he said. "I have run afoul of enough petty officials to have memorized them thoroughly. He will be reporting to Rain by morning." "I know," Benjamin said, "which means we need to leave at first light and move faster." She nodded and then she said very quietly, "Thank you." "You do not have to thank me for standing next to you," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said, "I suppose I do not." And something in her voice said that she was not entirely accustomed to not having to. They left Colbin's Ridge before the sun was fully up, in the gray pre-dawn chill with their breath visible, and Benjamin pushed the horses as hard as he dared on the early legs when the road was firm, and the animals were rested. The high plains stretched out in every direction, enormous and quiet, and without the ridge behind them or Drenville ahead they were very small and very exposed, and both of them knew it. Ursa, who had been watching the rear for an hour, said on the morning of the 5th day, "We are going to have a problem." He looked back. A line of riders, too far to count clearly, coming up behind them from the east. Fast horses, moving with coordinated purpose. "How many?" he asked. "8," she said. "Maybe 10. "That is too many," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "There is a garrison post at Westmark Creek approximately 4 hours at current pace. If we can reach it, we cannot reach it," he said. "Not at current pace, not with them at that speed." He looked at the road ahead. He knew this stretch. He had run it 8 times. There is a canyon cut 3 miles ahead, where the road drops into a creek channel between high banks. It narrows to 1 wagon width. They cannot ride 6 abreast through it. And when we come out the other side, on the other side there is an old way station called Kells. It has been abandoned for years, but the walls are stone and it sits on the creek bank. One entrance, defensible. She was already evaluating it in the way she evaluated everything. How long until the garrison riders from Westmark Creek pass Kells on their regular circuit? If they are on schedule, they should reach Kells about mid-afternoon. Then we hold until mid-afternoon. "Yes," he said. "Can you do that? Against 10 men in a stone-walled station, with you managing the entrance and me managing everything else?" She looked at him steadily. "Yes." "I can do more than manage the entrance," he said a little sharply. Her expression shifted toward something that held affection in it. "I know you can," she said. "I have seen you work. But today your most important job is keeping those horses calm and that wagon inside the station walls. Losing the wagon means losing our supplies and our mobility." It was not, he recognized, a dismissal. It was a tactical assessment, and it was correct. They made the canyon cut at a run, the horses blowing hard, the wagon chattering over the rough ground as the road dropped into the narrow creek channel with its high sandstone walls. Behind them, the riders were close enough that Benjamin could hear the percussion of their hooves, and he drove with his full attention on the road, picking the clearest line through the rocks in the creek bed, water spraying up under the wheels. Ursa was braced beside him with her short blade drawn and her other hand white-knuckled on the wagon rail, watching the canyon mouth behind them. They came out the other side with maybe 10 minutes lead time. Kells Way Station was exactly as he remembered it, a squat stone building against the creek bank with a walled yard big enough for 2 wagons. The wooden gate long rotted away, but the stone walls still sound. He drove straight in, unhitched Cobb and Rye at speed and ran them into the far corner of the yard, then helped Ursa position the wagon across the entrance gap where the gate had been. "This will hold them," she said, looking at the walls. "Long enough," he said. He had his short bow out and 4 dozen arrows from the supply box in the wagon bed, and he positioned himself at the east wall with a clean sightline on the entry gap. His hands were steady, which he noted with something like grim satisfaction. The riders came in 2 groups, which was tactically intelligent. 5 through the canyon and 5 around the bluff edge, cutting off retreat. They pulled up outside the gap when they saw the wagon across it, and the man in the front, Harp, raised his hand to stop them. He had shed the travel coat and was wearing light armor now, which changed his silhouette considerably. "You cannot hold that station," Harp called. "Come out with the case and Turner leaves untouched." "Your offer is inadequate," Ursa called back, and Benjamin was privately delighted by how bored she sounded. Harp tried twice more, varying the threats and the incentives, and each time she responded with the same flat disinterest. On the 3rd rider who tried to push past the wagon, she appeared at the wall above with a crossbow she had found hanging inside the station and made it clear that the wagon was not moving. They waited. The sun moved. The horses were calm because Benjamin talked to them steadily, which was not quite bravery but was a form of courage, and he knew it. The garrison riders appeared from the west at early afternoon, 6 of them in the organized livery of the regional constable's office, and the complexion of the standoff changed immediately. Harp tried to explain his position to the garrison sergeant, and the explanation got more complicated and less convincing the longer it went. And eventually, Harp and his riders were detained for questioning, and Ursa climbed down off the wall with the crossbow and gave it back to the constable, who asked for it with the same expression she would have used returning borrowed property. The garrison sergeant, a solid and weathered woman named Cook, looked at Ursa and then at Benjamin and then at the wagon with evident professional appreciation. "You held this station against 10 armed men," she said. "She held it against 10 armed men," Benjamin said honestly. "I managed the horses." "He is underselling himself," Ursa said. Sergeant Cook looked between them again with an expression that said she had seen a great many things on this road, and this was now on the list. "I will escort you to Drenville," she said. "Given the nature of what you are carrying, it seems appropriate." With Cook's 6 riders flanking the wagon, the rest of the journey unfolded without significant incident, which was both a relief and, Benjamin admitted to himself, slightly deflating in the way that all prolonged danger followed by sudden safety is deflating, a loosening of the sustained tension that left him quiet and a little tired. Ursa noticed. She sat beside him on the wagon seat on the 7th day with Drenville's distant towers visible on the western horizon, and she put her hand over his on the reins. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "just letting my nerves catch up with the fact that I am still alive." "That is physiologically normal," she said, with a precision that was so nearly identical to the way he spoke that he laughed, and she laughed with him, and it was the best sound he had heard in months. "Ursa," he said. "Yes. When this is done, when the case is delivered and the hearing is called and everything that needs to happen has happened," he paused, "I would like to not be done traveling with you." She was quiet for a moment. "I am not a settled woman," she said. "I move. I take work where it is. I do not have a home in the fixed sense." "I know," he said. "My wagon has a covered bed and I know all the water stops." The look she gave him then was the most unguarded thing he had seen on her face, and he had been paying close attention for 7 days. "You are serious," she said. "Completely." She turned forward and looked at Drenville's towers and was quiet for a long time. "Let us get through what comes first," she said finally, "and then we will talk. That is all I am asking," he said. Drenville was a proper city. Walled stone and tight streets, and the smell of river water and cook fires, and the complex undertone of a place where commerce and politics had been living together for a long time. They came in through the eastern gate in the early morning, Sergeant Cook's riders making a small stir, and Benjamin drove the wagon to the healer's hall first to register his arrival and to see the Aldrich Vane family, which could not wait. The Aldrich Vane household was in a state of prolonged distress. The family patriarch, a large man named Gorvin who looked 10 years older than he should, had been declining for almost a year, and his wife and adult son had been slowly fading with him in the manner of slow poison that Benjamin recognized and hated. He spent 3 hours with the attending healer, examining the household, the water source, the kitchen, the stored medicines, and found what he had suspected from the correspondence. A naturally occurring mineral compound, odorless and tasteless, had been introduced into the household's primary water supply via a filter stone installed behind the cistern. Removing it and beginning the clearing treatment would take weeks of careful work, but Benjamin could begin it now and leave detailed instructions with the healer. The family would recover. When he came out, he told Ursa what he had found, and she closed her eyes briefly. "Rain," she said. "Almost certainly," he said. "I will need to present this evidence at the council hearing if one is called." "It will be called," she said. "I am delivering the case this afternoon to the magistrate's office." Under Sergeant Cook's witness, the delivery of the documents went smoothly, procedurally. The magistrate's office received the sealed case, recorded the chain of custody, and acknowledged receipt. What happened next was where it became complicated. Callum Rain, who had apparently been informed of their arrival by whatever means of communication, a powerful and paranoid man maintains across 100 miles of road, filed an immediate counter-complaint with the council claiming the documents were forgeries, that the courier was a disreputable orc mercenary with an arrest record in 2 eastern provinces, and that one Benjamin Turner, a traveling apothecary with no fixed practice, had been involved in an assault on legitimate stewardship agents along the road. The council convened an emergency session the following morning. Benjamin was awake for most of the night before it. Not from fear exactly, but from the kind of close thinking that had always kept him company in the dark hours before difficult things. He sat in the chair in his room at the healer's hall and went through everything he knew and everything he could prove and what order to present it in. And at 3 in the morning, Ursa knocked on his door and came in and sat on the edge of his bed with her boots off and her braid down and said, "Stop thinking so loudly. I can hear it across the hall." He looked at her. She was extraordinary even like this, tired and carrying a bruised rib and a fading bruise on her cheek, her amber eyes calm in the lamplight. "Come here," she said, and it was not quite a command and not quite a question. He came and sat beside her on the edge of the bed, close enough that their arms were touching, and she leaned her shoulder against his, and they sat like that for a while in the lamp's low light. "He has held this council for 18 months, Benjamin said. "He knows all of them." "Darren will be here by tomorrow afternoon if the road held," she said. "He only needs to hold the council open long enough for Darren to arrive in person." The moment the legitimate heir is physically present in that room, Rain's position becomes untenable. "Unless Rain moves to have the hearing closed before then," Benjamin said. "Yes," she said, "which is why your evidence about the poisoning matters. If you present it in that room in front of everyone, the council cannot easily ignore it without implicating themselves. It creates enough noise to keep the hearing public. And the documents themselves. The documents are airtight," she said. 3 clan elder seals, a notarized record of birth, letters in Lord Aldrich's own hand, witnessed by the Eastern District Magistrate 12 years ago. Rain can call them forgeries, but he cannot prove it, and if the council has any competence at all, they will see that." Benjamin nodded. He was quiet for a moment. "Ursa," he said, "yes, whatever happens tomorrow. What you did on this road, what you are doing for this man you have never met," he paused, feeling for the words. "I want you to know that I see it, not just the fighting, all of it. The way you carry this thing you were trusted with, the way you keep going when it would be easier to stop." He turned to look at her. "You are the most remarkable person I have met in my entire life." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he watched the thing happen in her face again, that careful opening, the guard that was not quite low enough most of the time coming down. "You keep saying things like that," she said, "as if you mean them." "I keep meaning them," he said. She reached up and put her hand against his jaw, the same gesture as the fire on the second night, and she leaned in and kissed him with a quiet and certain intensity that said this was not just the road and the danger and the charged proximity of people who had survived something together. This was something she was choosing with her full, deliberate attention. When they separated, his heart was loud in his ears. "Stay," she said quietly. "Not for anything that cannot wait. Just stay." He stayed. They lay together in the narrow healer's hall bed with the lamp burned down to nothing, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her. And he thought that this was the least alone he had felt in so long that he could not calculate the length of it. And outside, the window Drenville went about its night business, and neither of them slept much. But that was all right. In the morning they dressed and went to the council hall together. The council chamber was a high-ceilinged stone room that smelled of old documents and lamp oil, with long benches for observers, and a raised table at the front, where the 7 council members sat in their robes of office. Callum Rain sat to one side at his own table with 2 advisors, and he was exactly the kind of man Benjamin had expected from the evidence, smooth and composed and watchful, with the polished confidence of someone who had been managing situations from a position of authority for a long time. He was perhaps 50, well-fed and well-tailored, and he looked at Ursa when she came in with a coolness that was attempting to suggest contempt, but was, Benjamin noticed, actually something closer to calculation. The chamber filled. This was the first evidence that something was shifting, because it filled with more than just the official parties. The poisoning of the Aldrich Vane family had been the subject of city whispers for months. Benjamin had learned from the healer's hall, and word of the incoming heir's documents had apparently spread through the trade district overnight. People were crowded into the observer benches, traders and craftsmen, and the kind of civic-minded citizens who appear whenever power is visibly unsteady. The council chief, a gray-haired woman named Magistrate Sorin, opened the session with the formulaic language of official proceedings and then looked at Rain. Rain presented his case efficiently. The documents were forgeries. The courier had a history of violent conduct, documented at 4 separate locations along the road. The apothecary traveling with her had participated in assault against stewardship agents. The emergency session should be closed as a matter of security, the documents impounded, and the matter referred to a private inquiry board of Rain's choosing. It was, Benjamin noted, very smooth. He had the tone of absolute authority, and 3 of the 7 council members were already nodding. Then Ursa stood up. She did not ask for permission, which was itself a statement. She stood at the center of the floor in her amber leathers with the satchel across her body and the document case in her hands, and she looked at Rain with the calm and absolute attention she had used on 6 men in Marin's trade post. "I will speak to the documented history of violent conduct," she said, in her precise and even common tongue. "The 4 incidents cited by the steward's aide all involve situations in which I was acting in defense of the document case I was entrusted to deliver, against agents who I can demonstrate were employed, directly or indirectly, by Callum Rain. I have depositions from Sergeant Cook of the Western Garrison, taken yesterday, in which she describes detaining 10 armed riders who had besieged a way station where I and my traveling companion had taken refuge after being pursued from Colbin's Ridge. She held up a packet of papers. These depositions are dated, witnessed, and sealed. One of the nodding council members stopped nodding. Furthermore, Ursa continued, I call Benjamin Turner, registered field surgeon and apothecary, to present evidence regarding the Aldrich Vane household, which I believe the council will find directly material to the question of the steward's conduct in this region. Benjamin stood and walked to the center of the floor and laid out everything. He was precise and methodical, and he spoke in the language of medicine and evidence, which was not the language of drama, but which had the advantage of being irrefutable. He described the compound, the method of delivery, the installed filter stone, the timeline of the family's decline relative to events in the stewardship. He presented his written analysis and the attending healer's corroborating observation. He named what it was, deliberate, sustained poisoning of collateral relatives of the late Lord who might otherwise have been able to give testimony regarding the Lord's wishes and the existence of a natural heir. The chamber was very quiet when he finished. Rain stood up. "This is, magistrate," said a new voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned. In the doorway stood a young man of 22, road-dusted and tired and bearing in his face the unmistakable stamp of Lord Aldrich's features, the broad brow and the pale gray eyes, wearing the clan-braided travel clothes of someone raised in the eastern valleys. Behind him were 3 Eastern clan elders in formal robes, and the Eastern District Magistrate who had witnessed his birth records 12 years ago. Darren had arrived. The silence in the council chamber was the kind that happens when a room full of people simultaneously revises its understanding of the situation. Rain looked at Darren, and for the first time his composure showed its fault lines. Not collapse, not yet, but the specific look of a man who has been operating on the assumption that a particular card will not appear on the table and has just watched it appear. Magistrate Sorin, to her considerable credit, said, "This session is now a public hearing. It will remain open. No party may move to close it until all evidence is entered." She looked directly at Rain when she said the last sentence. What followed was not quick. It took the rest of the morning and into the afternoon, with 3 recesses and a great deal of document examination, and the formal testimony of the Eastern District Magistrate and the clan elders. Rain fought every inch of it with the tenacity of someone who knows their situation is bad, but who has not yet run out of procedural options. He challenged the chain of custody of the documents, and Ursa's delivery record, and Benjamin standing as a witness. He implied with layered and deniable language that an orc courier and a traveling apothecary were an inherently suspect pairing with obvious motives for fraud. Benjamin, from his seat beside Ursa, felt her jaw tighten at that last one. He found her hand under the table and held it. She looked at him sideways and said nothing, but her hand held back. The reversal came in the second afternoon session, and it came from an unexpected direction. One of the council members, a trade district representative named Feld who had been silent all morning, asked Rain to produce the original will by which he had been named regent, not the copy that had been circulated. The original, with the wax seal intact. Rain said the original was in the stewardship archive. Feld said the stewardship archive had been audited yesterday morning on his instruction, in anticipation of this hearing, and the original will was not there. A copy was there, and the copy had a seal that did not match the seal impressions in Lord Aldrich's other known documents. The chamber erupted. In the noise and the crosstalk and Rain's increasingly sharp objections and the magistrate's gavel, Benjamin watched Callum Rain's 18 months of constructed authority come apart the way structures come apart when their central support is removed. Not slowly, not gracefully, but all at once, everything that had been holding everything else up suddenly contributing to the collapse. Rain was taken into custody of the constable's office before the session closed. Darren, standing in the center of the chamber with the Eastern clan elders, looked like a young man trying very hard to absorb the reality of a life that had just changed entirely. He found Ursa in the crowd and looked at her with an expression of exhausted, enormous relief. "You delivered it," he said. "I said I would," she said. He looked at Benjamin. "And you helped her." "She is very capable," Benjamin said. "I mostly provided medical services and drove the wagon." Darren smiled. He had his father's eyes. "The Aldrich Vane family," he said. "Are they going to be all right?" "Yes," Benjamin said, "if the treatment instructions are followed." "Stay," Darren said, "please. Until they are well." He looked between them. "Both of you, Drenville owes you more than I can say today." They stayed. It took 3 weeks for the Aldrich Vane family to begin showing real improvement, the slow clearing of the compound from their systems, the color coming back into Gorvin's face, the particular return of appetite that tells a healer more than any other symptom. Benjamin worked carefully and kept detailed notes and taught the attending healer everything he had learned, and found in the work a satisfaction that ran bone deep. This was what the road had always been for, the places where he could do something that genuinely mattered. Ursa stayed in Drenville through those 3 weeks, which he had not quite let himself assume she would. She took on a guard contract with the city garrison while the new administration was being established, working with Sergeant Cook's people to untangle the network of Rain's hired operatives still at large in the region. It was useful work, and she was good at it, and she came to find Benjamin in the evenings with the particular purposeful ease of someone who knows where they are going. They had dinner together at the healer's hall table on the first evening and walked the riverside afterward in the cool early autumn dark, and on the 4th evening she came to his room and did not leave, and on the 6th evening she brought her things and set them down with a completeness that meant something, and he did not say anything about it, but he smiled for a long time after she had gone to sleep. She woke up and found him smiling and said, "What?" "Nothing," he said. "Good dream." "You were not asleep," she said. "Very good waking thought then." She turned over and looked at him in the lamplight, propped up on one arm, and the expression on her face was something she no longer tried to conceal. "I am not easy to travel with," she said. "I know this." "I have traveled with you for over a week under active pursuit," he said. "I have a baseline." "I mean over a longer time," she said. "I take work where it is. I wake before dawn because I always have. I check the exits of every room I enter and I cannot stop doing it. I have strong opinions about camp placement and fire size. I have noticed all of these things," he said. "They do not bother you, not even slightly." She looked at him steadily. "Why not?" she said, and the question had more beneath it than the words. "Because they are you," he said simply. And I would rather have all of you, exit checking and strong fire opinions and everything else, than a version of you that has had the interesting parts removed." She was quiet for a moment, and he saw something move across her face, a complex and layered thing, the kind of feeling that does not resolve quickly into words. "My mother," she said finally, "used to say that the right person for you is someone who sees you clearly and wants more, not less." She paused. "I thought that was a comfortable story she told because the alternative was too difficult. And now," he said. She looked at him. "Now I think she was right," she said, and leaned down and kissed him with a slow and certain warmth that was entirely different from the charged first kiss at the fire, and entirely the same in the way things that are true stay true across their variations. By the end of the third week, the Aldrich Vane family was well enough that Gorvin sat at his own dinner table for the first time in 8 months, which made his wife cry in a way that made Benjamin have to look at the ceiling for a moment. On the morning of the 22nd day since their arrival, Ursa came to find him at the healer's hall and said, "The garrison work is done. Rain's remaining people have been identified and contained." "How are you?" he asked. "Ready to move," she said, and it was plain and honest. She was a moving person, she had told him so. "I have a consultation request in Ashfork," he said. "Marin at the trade post has been writing to me about her husband's back injury for 3 months. "Ashfork," Ursa said, "where we started." "Yes," he said. "It would be a return trip on the same road." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you suggesting we go back the same way we came?" "I am suggesting we go back to Ashfork together," he said. "After which I have no set plans and a covered wagon and a working knowledge of the water stops." The corner of her mouth moved in the way it moved when she was choosing not to suppress the smile. "I told you," she said, "I am not a settled woman." "I know," he said. "I am not asking for settled. I am asking for a direction." She looked at him for a long moment with those amber eyes, and he sat still under the look and waited, because he had learned that she thought in her own time and her conclusions were worth waiting for. "East first," she said. "I have a report to deliver to the clan elders about Darren's arrival. After that, north along the river road. There is work in the border towns, and I have been putting it off." "I have been wanting to run the river road for years," he said truthfully. "My uncle always said it was the best country on the continent." "It is," she said. "I will show you." Before they left, Darren held a small reception at what was now formally his household, a gracious and low-key event that was mostly logistics and handshaking, and the careful work of a young man taking the reins of something large. He asked both of them to stay, formally, as part of his new administration, which was an honor and which both of them declined for reasons that were different in their specifics and the same in their nature. "You are going back on the road," Darren said, looking between them with the clear-eyed understanding of a young man who had grown up among people who read situations accurately. "Yes," Ursa said. "Together," he added. "Yes," Benjamin said. Darren nodded. He had his father's eyes and his mother's practicality, and he said, "Good. The road needs more people on it who are worth a damn." He shook their hands and let them go. They left Drenville on a clear morning in the full depth of autumn, the city gates behind them and the high plains road ahead, Cobb and Rye well rested and moving at a good pace. The covered wagon loaded with fresh supplies and Benjamin's kit, and a new piece of luggage that was Ursa's. A long, weather-worn travel satchel that she had strapped to the side of the wagon, with a competence that suggested it had been strapped to the sides of many wagons. She sat on the seat beside him, and the road unrolled in front of them, and the sky was the particular pale gold of late-season morning, and the mesa country rose on the far horizon like the spine of something sleeping. "It will take 4 days to reach Ashfork at a wagon pace," she said. "I know," he said. "We could ride faster." "We could," he said. "But then we would get there faster." She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road with great deliberate innocence. "You want 4 days," she said. "I want however many days there are," he said, "but I will accept 4. She made the sound that was almost certainly a laugh that she was choosing not to fully express, and she put her arm through his and sat close against him on the seat. 4 days later, they rolled into Ashfork on a dry afternoon with the low sun behind them, the wagon casting a long shadow onto the main road. Benjamin had been to Ashfork 8 times. He had been born a day's ride from it. He had come through it in seasons and in hardships and in the unremarkable ordinary processions of a working life on the road, and it had always been what it was, a way stop, a place to resupply and move on. Today it felt different. Marin's trade post was its usual controlled chaos, a 7-day crowd, horses tied outside, the sound of voices and the smell of the stew she always had on. But someone had seen them coming up the road, and word had apparently moved through the post in the particular fast way that news moves in a small place. Because by the time Benjamin tied the horses and he and Ursa came through the front door, the room had a specific quality of attention that was not the normal 7-day noise. Marin herself came around the bar, a wide and practical woman of middle years who had known Benjamin since he was running his uncle's cart, and she looked at him and she looked at Ursa and she said, "I heard things. About you too. About what happened at Drenville." "Some things happened," Benjamin said. "Harp's people came through here last month," Marin said. "Came through asking about you, about whether you were with the Orc courier." She said the word plainly without the contemptuous emphasis that some people gave it, and her eyes were on Ursa with something that was more curiosity than hostility. "I told them I did not know anything about any courier, which was true at the time." "Thank you," Ursa said. "Rain is gone," Marin said. "Word came down the road 3 days ago from the garrison riders. The council in Drenville threw him out. Real heir installed." She looked at both of them. "That was you." "It was Ursa," Benjamin said. "She carried the documents." "You helped," Ursa said to him with a firmness that closed the topic. Marin looked between them again with the expression that Sergeant Cook had also used, the look of someone who has read something quickly and accurately. Then she looked out at her crowded post and said, in a voice that carried to the room, "Ben Turner and the Ironhide courier just put rain on the street and put the right man in charge of the whole road district. Everybody here does business on that road." She paused. "I think that merits a round." The room responded in the way that rooms respond to free drinks and the relief of a threat removed, with noise and warmth, and the loosening of people who had been quietly tense about something they had not fully articulated. What followed was not, exactly, a hero's welcome. It was rougher and more genuine than that. There were people in that room who had known Benjamin for years and regarded him with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had stitched their wounds and diagnosed their ailments and sometimes argued about payment. And there were people in that room who had clearly had opinions about Orc couriers working the High Plains Road, who looked at Ursa with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to openly hostile to. As the evening went on and the drinks went around and the story was told in pieces, something closer to recalibration. Corvin, whose shoulder Benjamin had been treating for 3 months, shook Ursa's hand with a forthright awkwardness and said, "I saw what you did in here last month. That was something." He looked at her hand. "Is that a warrior's grip?" "Yes," she said. "Thought so," he said and nodded, and went back to his drink with the air of a man who has filed an important piece of information. There was a man near the window who said something that Benjamin did not fully catch but whose tone was clear, glancing at him, and at Ursa with a contemptuous assumption about what their traveling together meant, using words that were not loud but were not quiet either. Benjamin heard it and felt the warmth in his chest go cold and brief. Ursa heard it too. She was very still for a moment. Benjamin turned toward the man at the window. "I would ask you to repeat that," he said. His voice was even, loudly enough for the room to hear. The man looked at him with the assessing gaze of someone calibrating risk. "He will not repeat it," Ursa said beside him, not looking at the man, looking at Benjamin with something bright in her eyes. "Because repeating it would require him to say it to your face instead of to your back, and that is a different proposition." The man at the window did not repeat it. He left shortly afterward. Benjamin looked at Ursa. "You did not need me for that," she said. But you were going to do it anyway. Yes, he said. Why? He held her gaze. Because you matter to me, he said. That is not a complicated reason. She looked at him for a long moment in the warmth and noise of Marin's trade post, with the fire high and the crowd around them and the whole road ahead, and the expression on her face was the most open he had ever seen it, nothing guarded, nothing held in reserve. It was the face of someone who had stopped being surprised that they were loved and had started, carefully and with full attention, believing it. Benjamin Turner, she said. Ursa Ironhide, he said. You drive a very slow wagon. Oh? The river road north of here is faster, she said. Better country, fewer people trying to steal from me. You mentioned that, he said. I am still interested. Are you certain, she said. It is not easy country, cold at altitude. The border posts can be hostile to orc travelers. The work is rough. I have a kit, he said, and a wagon and a shortbow and a working knowledge of how to avoid the worst of the altitude sickness, and I have spent my entire adult life driving roads like that. He paused, and I will have you. She took his face in her hands, both of them, her large, scarred, extraordinary hands warm against his jaw, and she kissed him in the middle of Marin's trade post on a 7-day with a room full of people watching, which was not the kind of thing she did, which meant she was doing it because she chose to. And when she drew back, the room had the specific silence of people who have witnessed something genuine. Marin, behind the bar, said nothing, but she refilled both their cups without being asked. They sat by the fire that evening until the crowd had thinned, talking in the easy way they had talked on the road, about the route north and what they would need and the season's timing and the particular challenges of the border posts, and also about smaller things, the way the fire sounded, the quality of the stew, a joke Corvin had told that was bad enough to be endearing. And the conversation moved the way conversations move between people who are not performing for each other, without agenda, finding its own level. Late in the evening, when the post had quieted to its last few occupants, Ursa said, My mother would have liked you. He looked at her. Would she? She valued honest men, Ursa said. Honest men are rarer than they seem. She looked at the fire. She died when I was 20, fever same as your uncle. I am sorry, he said. She would have said exactly what you said to me, Ursa said, that you would rather have all of me. She always said the interesting parts were the non-negotiable ones. She was right, he said. Ursa looked at him sideways, and the lamp caught her eyes and made them almost gold, and she said very quietly, When I asked you if you were frightened of me, in this room, after. Yes, he said. You said no immediately, she said, without thinking. It was true immediately, he said. I know, she said. That is what I keep coming back to. She paused. Most people think they arrange their face first. You did not. I was looking at you, he said simply. There was nothing to arrange. She was quiet for a moment. I have spent a very long time, she said, and her voice was careful but open, the way it was when she was choosing to say something real, being good at everything that keeps other people safe and bad at letting anything come close, because close is complicated and the work is not. I know, he said. And then there was you, she said. In the middle of everything, not running, not managing me, just standing there asking about my cheek. The cheek needed looking at, he said. Everything about you, she said, is exactly what it looks like. Is that good, he asked. It is, she said, the most unusual thing I have encountered in a long career. He reached over and tucked a loose strand of her braid back behind her ear, a small and easy gesture, and she turned her face slightly into his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. North then, he said. River Road. When do you want to leave? 2 days, she said. I need to resupply and send a report east by courier, and Marin's husband needs that back consultation you owe her. That will take a morning, he said. Good, she said. We leave on the 3rd day. They left on the 3rd day, as they had decided, in the early morning with the horses rested and the wagon resupplied, and the air carrying the first real cold that said winter was somewhere over the northern horizon thinking about arriving. The town came out, not in a crowd, but in the way small places send off people they have decided to claim, a few at a time, with nods and raised hands, and Marin at the post door with her arms crossed and something approving on her face. Ursa rode on the seat beside him, and the river road opened up ahead, a different road than the one that had brought them here, greener and narrower and running along the sound of water, and the mesa country dropped behind them as the northern hills rose, and Cobb and Rye moved into it with the willingness of horses who are going somewhere new. "You know this road?" Ursa asked. "Not at all," he said. "Good," she said, and there was something in it that was pleasure. "I will navigate, you drive." "I always drive," he said. "Yes," she said, and leaned against his shoulder with the easy warmth of a person who is exactly where they have chosen to be. The road wound ahead into the hills, into the country she had promised was the best on the continent, and Benjamin Turner drove his slow wagon north with Ursa Ironhide at his side, and the sound of the river on his right and the whole wide adventurous world ahead. And he was not frightened, and he was not alone, and the distance between where he had been and where he was now was measurable only in the things that had finally begun.